welcome back to the CNBC TV18 Motilal Oswal Budget Headquarters. We are getting closer and closer to 0 hour, and we now have three prominent economists to tell us what the big numbers will look like. Samiran Chakraborty, Chief Economist at Citi India, Pranjul Bhandari, the Chief India Economist at HSBC, and Kaushik, Chief Economist at Deutsche Bank. Gentlemen, and Pranjul, thank you very much for sparing time for us. Samiran, to start with you, what have you picked up from the survey that changes your mind about the budget in terms of, estimate of the GDP, estimate of tax buoyancy, anything?
So, Latha, the ECO survey, as you know, has put a real GDP growth forecast of 6.5 to 7% for what on the conservative side, but this kind of matches with the interim budget nominal GDP growth estimate that was taken to be around 10.5%. So we don't think that that changes much in the actual budget numbers. And it also looks like that the economic reform paths that the survey talks about, clearly highlighting that the supply side reforms of the last two governments that have borne fruit. And on top of it, we have to now do the next gen reforms, which will be more about the bottom-up reforms. So I would expect that the budget takes that forward and that outlines the next 5 years plan for the government. I think that's what will be more important. The 10 basis point of GDP, higher revenue or higher expenditure is not something that will have a very lasting effect on markets. It's the idea of the next 5 years of reforms that will really be more exciting for us.
Okay, point taken. Pranjul, your thoughts. There is a point of view that this 1.3 trillion extra money from the Reserve Bank is a one-off. And logically, you should not spend it on welfare programs that will recur year after year. They are best used to set off the budget deficit. Your thoughts? Should we expect 4.9?
Yeah, thanks, Latha. Actually, I am expecting 4.9. But just to take a step back, I think the economic survey was extremely realistic. It gave you a GDP number of 6.5 to 7, which is actually lower than what the RBI has been talking about. It spoke about how the whole Viksit Bharat trajectory is going to be hard because the global economy has changed. Rates are higher, geopolitics, AI, climate change. It's not going to be easy at all. Everybody will have to work together, government, state, private sector. So it was very realistic. And I'm hoping for the same realism in today's budget. Now, when has the budget come to us? It's come at a time when we are seeing few things working well. For example, construction activity is good, public capex is good, but a few things not working very well. For example, consumption. And my sense is that the budget this time can do well what it has continued to do. For example, focus on fiscal consolidation, keep a keen eye on capex, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but do the new thing that is also needed, which is give some sort of a fillip to consumption. Now, it doesn't have to get profligate, but better fund some of the welfare schemes it has already been running. For example, PM Kisan, Narega, some of the rural and social welfare schemes, just better fund that. Because if we see other current expenditure, which is, excluding subsidies and interest payments, it's actually much lower than pre-pandemic levels. So just increase it by about 0.2% of GDP. You have the revenues in a very perfect year. Don't announce a new scheme, just better fund some of the old welfare schemes. And I'm hoping that to show up in the budget this time. A better balance between capex and consumption than we saw back in the February budget.
Okay, well, actually, Samiran, you said you expect some 5-year kind of announcement, which makes sense because this government was preparing for the first 100 days of announcement even before the elections. What can we expect?
There's nothing. Let's understand first that there were certain things that the government was doing very well, like, say, for example, infrastructure spending, a push towards manufacturing, keeping the macro stability intact. So I would think that continuity on these things will very much be required. But it's also important to put the guideposts in front of us. So let's say on infrastructure, what is the next 5 years roadmap for infrastructure? If the budget lays down that roadmap, it immediately gets the markets more excited about things. So that sort of announcement in the budget is what I would be expecting. And then to take a leap from Pranjul, what Pranjul said, would this be balanced by something on the demand side? Now, the economic survey has not talked explicitly about any demand side measures. It talks about doing a lot of social welfare issues and where the government has played a major role. But would we see allocations going higher for this? The only challenge there is that this much of RBI dividend might not be available every year.
Yeah.
So we might have limited scope of doing this. So that has to be very nicely calibrated. And then the last is what I was mentioning, that the next generation of reforms, what are the ways in which what the economic survey talks about removing the regulatory bottlenecks? Is there a roadmap for removing these regulatory bottlenecks? If those things come in the budget, I think that will really make it a very exciting one.
Absolutely, Samiran, take your point. By the way, I was going through your note, and I thought the point that you made on the quality of expenditure improving over the last couple of years, that was a great point, right? I remember the numbers as well, from about 15.5% of GDP revenue expenditure, that number coming down to 12%. Capex, average increasing 30% year on year. That was a very big directional shift that we saw in the last few years. So, Kaushik Das, let me come to you. Kaushik, do you expect that directional shift to continue with maybe, some sweeteners here and there? And if yes, then what kind of sweeteners? I mean, let's say subsidies. What would you expect? Because what we've seen in the past is a gradual reduction in subsidies, an increase in defense, an increase in infrastructure. Do you see any departure from that past trend?
Yeah, hi, good morning. I think the budget would kind of stick to the fiscal consolidation path. Our base case scenario is 5% target for this year, better than the interim budget estimate of 5.1, with the possibility that you can go down to 4.9% of GDP as well. So let's see. I mean, I'm expecting somewhere between 4.9 to 5%. Now, as you've discussed, the RBI has given quite a lot of funds to the government of India this year through dividend. So I think it will be a mix of everything. You will get a bit of consumption boost to the items which are already there in the budget. You don't need to add any new welfare programs. Whatever programs are there, whether it is rural development or any kind of other programs that you can think of, there could be additions by 5,000 crore, 10,000 crore here and there. Subsidies that you mentioned, maybe food subsidies will be a little higher, fertilizer subsidy. So all taken together, I think about 80,000 crore would be additional expenditure compared to the interim budget estimates. But that would still leave about 50,000 crore, in savings because the excess that the government has got from RBI is in the tune of 1.2 to 1.3 trillion INR. So that 50,000 crore is equivalent to 0.1 or a little bit more of GDP, which can bring down the fiscal deficit to 5% or even lower. So I think it will be a delicate balance of how you can boost a bit of consumption, but not cause inflation. We know that the Capex push will be anyway there. But remember that last year was about 9.5 trillion INR. This time they've said 11.1 trillion. But you have to spend that 11.1 trillion in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
So I would not expect too much of Capex increase on top of what we already have, which is itself a good number. But overall, I think it will be a balanced budget focused towards fiscal consolidation while providing a consumption boost, which is possible because of the RBI dividend.
For point taken, there is only actually another budget is coming in 6 months on February 1st. So, where is the bandwidth if you put in more money on Capex? And that is the one point where if you see the April-May, central government numbers, that is where the government has fallen short. Capex spend. They've done much better on taxes, which brings me to the final question. Pranjul, tax buoyancy, both FY24 and FY23, much better than what the budget estimates put in. So would you expect them to continue to expect more? Will that be the big number change, GTR or net tax revenue?
So, we've been seeing that the government goes into these budget numbers very conservatively. They, assume a very conservative tax buoyancy of 1 to 1.1. And what we've been seeing in practice is numbers like 1.2 and 1.3 coming out. My sense is it'll continue to have that same, conservative stance. today. And, hopefully we'll be surprised on the upside, by the time the year ends. So I don't see any big change there, but I do agree that tax buoyancy, once it goes higher than 1, it stays higher than 1 for a couple of years, because we're seeing in India these structural changes, better tax information network, bringing together Aadhaar and different other platforms, and basically, much better tax compliance than in the past. I feel the tax buoyancy will remain more than 1 for longer. Latha, if you have like 10 seconds, I want to make a quick point on Capex. I think rather than just looking at the Capex number, where I don't think there's going to be any change compared to February, I think we need to get into a lot more details now. They had earmarked about 700 billion, 70,000 crores, and they had not really said where it will go. Those details will be important. They had also said that 750 billion to states in terms of Capex loans will be conditional. How will those conditions be designed? What will be the details? I think these finer points will be very interesting in Capex, because we need to get a little more sophisticated there. Right now, most of the Capex has happened in roads, railways, and defense, but we need many more shovel-ready projects in many more sectors at this point of time to keep the Capex story alive for longer. So getting into the details of Capex, I think, will also be important in today's budget.
All right. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining in and giving us, the expected budget math. Let's see how the eventual numbers turn out, and we'll touch base with you again. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Let's quickly